Imagine walking into a room where no one knows your name, and instead of proving yourself, just observing, not defending, not explaining, just existing. Sounds strange, because most of us are trained to perform, to justify, to say, "Here's why I am the way I am. Please understand me, accept me, approve of me." But what if I told you the moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you start taking your power back? The Stoics, those quiet warriors of inner strength, understood something we often forget in a world full of noise. Silence is not emptiness, it's mastery. And the compulsion to explain, that's a chain you put on your own wrist. See, when you constantly explain yourself, what you're really saying is, "I believe your judgment is more important than my truth." You surrender control to others. You play a game where your worth is measured by how well you can make others feel comfortable about who you are. And that is exhausting, not just emotionally, spiritually. Epictetus once said, "If someone speaks ill of you, live in such a way that no one will believe it." He didn't say, "Go and defend yourself." He didn't say, "Make them understand." He said, "Live. Let your actions whisper louder than your words ever could." Because here's the truth. People will always misunderstand you. They'll project, judge, invent stories, and no amount of explaining will ever change a mind that's already decided what it wants to see. So the Stoics chose silence, not out of fear, but because silence creates mystery. And mystery creates power. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop leaking energy into people who are never truly listening. You stop putting your self-worth up for auction, and suddenly you become untouchable, unbothered, free. There's a strange strength in simply smiling when someone demands an explanation. A quiet no, a peaceful, "That's just who I am." No drama, no defense, just peace. Because the more you explain, the more permission you give others to dissect you, to debate your identity, to feel entitled to your reasoning. But when you stop explaining, you draw a line, a boundary that says, "My life is mine, not yours to approve." And this scares people, because most people live their whole lives trying to be understood, trying to earn approval. But Stoicism teaches something radical. You don't need to be understood, you just need to be anchored in who you are. So ask yourself, how much time have you spent explaining your dreams, your beliefs, your decisions to people who never cared to understand in the first place? What if you just stopped? What if the next time someone questions your path, you simply smiled and walked on? Because silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you trust yourself more than the world's opinion of you. It means your peace is louder than their noise. It means you've already won. They taught you to be good, to sit straight, to say sorry even when it wasn't your fault. They smiled when you obeyed and frowned when you dared to question. That's how it begins. From the moment you're born, you're groomed to seek approval, not from within, but from eyes that stare, from voices that judge, from systems that thrive on obedience, not authenticity. When a child draws on a wall, they're not expressing defiance, they're expressing themselves. But the world doesn't applaud expression. It rewards compliance. So you learned. Fast. You learned that silence brings peace, that conformity brings love, that pleasing others is safer than being misunderstood. You were never told this directly, but it was written between every rule, carved into every "be polite," etched into every "what will people say." This isn't about your parents. It's not even about society. It's about a system of psychological survival where acceptance equals survival and rejection feels like death. So, you adapted. You became the good student, the reliable friend, the nice person. But beneath the surface, something else was forming. A dependency, not on drugs, but on something far more dangerous. Validation. You became addicted to being liked. You feared being misunderstood, and every time you were judged unfairly, you didn't fight back. You explained, again and again, until explaining became your identity, until you forgot how to just be. Stoicism cuts through that illusion. The Stoics knew explaining yourself is not strength, it's a leash, a chain disguised as communication. Because every time you explain yourself to someone who's already judged you, you give them your power. You become smaller, more palatable, more acceptable. But truth doesn't need permission. Power doesn't beg for understanding. Now ask yourself, how many choices have you made just to avoid discomfort? How often do you bite your tongue, not because you're wise, but because you're afraid? And how many parts of yourself have you buried just to fit in? You weren't born this way. You were taught, conditioned, programmed to equate your value with how well you could please and how clearly you could explain. But here's the truth the Stoics embraced. The need to be understood is the enemy of peace. Because not every mind is ready to receive truth. Not every heart is open enough to handle your reality. Some people don't misunderstand you because they can't understand. They misunderstand because it serves them. They don't want clarity, they want control. And your explanation gives it to them. So what do? You stop. You pause. You hold your truth in silence, not because you're hiding it, but because not every truth deserves an audience. Silence is not surrender, it is strategy. And sometimes it's the loudest answer. When you were a child, silence was punishment. Now, silence is power, because when you stop chasing validation, when you stop performing for the crowd, you begin to find your center, the real you. And when that happens, you no longer live to be accepted. You live to be whole. You've probably been there. You say no to something. You take a different path. You choose solitude over the crowd. And suddenly, the questions start. Why? Are you okay? What's wrong with you? And you feel that itch, the one that tells you, explain, justify, make them understand. But here's what the Stoics knew. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your alignment with truth. In fact, the more you try to explain yourself to people who aren't ready to hear you, the more you dilute your own clarity. Seneca said, if you want to be loved, love yourself. He didn't say, explain yourself. He didn't say, convince them. He said, return inward, because real freedom begins when you stop trying to control how others perceive you. The Stoics weren't silent because they had nothing to say. They were silent because they were certain of what they stood for. And certainty doesn't scream. Imagine walking into a storm, but instead of fighting the wind, you walk calmly with purpose while others shout and scramble. That was the Stoic way. While the world reacted, they responded with silence, with stillness, with presence. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." In other words, live your values, don't explain them. But how do you reach that level of stillness in a world that thrives on reaction? It starts with the discipline of not answering every attack, of not proving your worth to every critic, of not performing for every audience. Because the truth is, every time you over-explain, you teach others to doubt your conviction. You teach them that you need their approval to feel stable. But silence, that teaches them something else, that you are unmoved, unbothered, rooted. Stoicism isn't passive, it's deliberate. It's choosing action over explanation. It's showing, not telling. It's the quiet strength that doesn't argue you because it doesn't need to. And when you practice this kind of silence, conscious silence, you start to hear something powerful, your own voice, not the voice of fear, not the voice of your inner critic, but the voice that knows who you are and doesn't flinch. You start realizing that most people aren't asking questions to understand you. They're asking to pull you back into the mold they're comfortable with. And every time you refuse to explain, you say, "I'm no longer shape-shifting for your comfort." It's not arrogance, it's clarity. It's knowing that your time is sacred. Your values are not up for negotiation. And your energy is better spent being, not explaining. Remember this, when a lion walks into a room, it doesn't roar to prove it's a lion. Its presence says everything. You don't need to roar. You don't need to prove. You just need to walk in truth and let your silence echo louder than noise. The Stoics practiced this every day. They knew that peace wasn't found in proving yourself. It was found in letting go of the need to be understood. And now, you're faced with the same challenge. Can you stay centered while misunderstood? Can you stay calm when misjudged? Can you trust your path enough to walk it without applause? Because here's the paradox. The less you explain, the more others begin to respect you. The more you hold your silence, the more your presence speaks. So the next time you feel that old itch to justify, to explain, to be liked, pause, breathe, return inward, and remember, the world doesn't need another loud voice. It needs more anchored souls. Silence. It looks like nothing, but it's everything. You think power is in what's said, in who speaks the loudest, who has the last word. But what if true control lives in what's left unsaid? Imagine you're in a room, someone insults you, everyone turns to see your reaction, and you say nothing. You've just broken their script. You didn't feed their fire. You didn't validate their attack with energy. You let silence answer for you. And silence, it speaks volumes. Carl Jung believed that people project their insecurities onto others, but silence gives no surface for those projections to stick. You become a mirror, and that terrifies them, because silence isn't emptiness. It's a boundary, a choice, a message without words. In relationships, silence changes the balance of power. The person who can stay quiet without rushing to explain, justify, or defend holds the emotional high ground. Because silence doesn't chase, it invites. It lets the other person wonder, reflect, even doubt. Psychologically, this triggers something powerful. Uncertainty. And in human dynamics, uncertainty equals control. People are used to reactions, they feed off them. They expect pushback, drama, explanation. But silence denies them that nourishment. It forces others to face themselves, their motives, their intentions, their words, echoing in their own heads, unanswered. It's not passive, it's deliberate. And in a world addicted to over-communication, the one who knows how to remain still becomes magnetic. Now let's talk relationships, personal, professional, or social. We often think talking solves everything, that more words equals more clarity. But some of the most powerful shifts happen when you don't respond. You don't beg. You don't argue. You don't explain why they were wrong. You let them feel your silence, not as punishment, but as proof of your peace. Machiavelli would call this calculated withdrawal. He wrote, "He who lets himself be carried away by passion loses sight of his advantage." Silence then becomes your advantage, not because you're weak, but because you're focused on what matters. Your boundaries, your energy, your values. You're not avoiding conflict. You're choosing when to engage, and that choice is everything, because silence forces people to lean in, to listen harder, to second guess, and that shifts the dynamic of the entire room. Think of the most powerful people you've ever met. They didn't dominate conversations. They didn't speak to prove something. They spoke when it mattered, and when they didn't speak, that mattered even more. So when someone disrespects you, don't rush to defend. Pause. When someone questions you, don't explain your whole story. Stay centered. When someone tries to provoke you, don't fall into the trap. Let silence carry your truth, because in that silence, you reveal self-mastery. Not everything deserves a reaction. Not everyone deserves your energy. And here's the secret. The more silent you become, the more powerfully you speak, without ever opening your mouth. This is not about being cold. It's about being intentional. It's about knowing the weight of your presence and letting it speak louder than your defense. And when you master that, you walk into any room with power, because silence doesn't beg. It doesn't prove. It doesn't chase. It commands. And the world listens. You've been there, trying to explain your truth to someone who's already made up their mind, who doesn't want understanding. They want confirmation of their own bias. You speak, they nod, but they're not listening. They're just waiting for their turn to respond, to correct you, dismiss you, or pull you back into their worldview. And in that moment, you realize not all minds are open. Not all hearts are ready. Explaining yourself to a closed mind is like pouring clean water into a cracked glass. No matter how pure it is, it leaks through. Stoic wisdom says, don't waste your breath on ears that cannot hear. Because your energy is currency, and not every conversation is worth the price. It's not about arrogance, it's about discernment. A powerful mind doesn't speak to be heard, it speaks to be understood. And when understanding is impossible, silence is the highest form of clarity. You don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't need to justify your path to those who've never walked it. You don't need to unpack your pain for people who only carry judgment. See, some people ask questions not to learn, but to trap, to undermine, to feed their ego with your confusion. But the wise know, just because someone asks doesn't mean you must answer, because truth isn't performance, and understanding isn't something you can force. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." And the more you try to explain yourself to those who judge by appearances, the more you shrink your truth to fit their narrow lens. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Let them misunderstand you. Let them think what they will, because people who are committed to misunderstanding you will twist even your clarity into confusion. They don't want the truth. They want control. And you're done being controlled. You're not here to perform your life like it's a courtroom. You're not here to prove your worth to those who can't see it. Your silence, it's not weakness, it's mastery. It says, I don't argue with noise. I don't explain myself to those who refuse to listen. I know who I am, and I no longer need you to know it too. This is how you reclaim your time, your peace, your power. You stop watering dead soil. You stop feeding minds that refuse to grow. And suddenly, you start to breathe again. You realize the weight wasn't your truth. It was the effort of carrying it to those who never asked with love. So now you choose carefully who gets your voice, who gets your truth, who deserves your energy, and those who don't, they can sit in silence while you rise in it, because from this moment on, you're done explaining yourself to those who don't want to understand. Imagine waking up one day and realizing you haven't defended yourself in weeks, not once. You've said no, without explaining why. You've changed directions, without offering apologies. You've chosen silence, not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the need to be seen. And guess what? You're still here. The world didn't collapse. The people who truly care about you, they're still around. Or maybe they just got closer. And those who left, maybe they were never listening to begin with. Living without constant explanation isn't rebellion. It's peace. A quiet rebellion of the soul that whispers, I am not your story to define. Because every time you explain yourself, you ask for permission to exist, and you don't need permission not to change, not to say no, not to want something different, not to be someone different. Stoics knew this. They believed that the more you try to convince others, the less you convince yourself, and that the highest freedom is not being understood, but being unshakably you. The world may demand answers. Let it. The more silent you become, the louder your presence grows. No justification, no disclaimers, no walking on eggshells for minds that will twist your words anyway. You are not a product to be marketed. You are not a vote to be won. You are not here to make everyone comfortable with your truth. You're here to live it fully, fiercely, freely. Let them misinterpret. Let them misunderstand. You don't owe them the version of you they're comfortable with, because here's the truth. Being understood is comforting, but being free is divine. So maybe the real question isn't, will they get me, but rather, do I still need them to? Because once you no longer crave their understanding, you become untouchable, not cold, not distant, just untamed. You walk into rooms without shrinking. You set boundaries without guilt. You pursue your path, even when it's invisible to everyone else. You're not trying to fit into their map anymore. You've made your own. That's what happens when you stop defending. You stop shrinking. And with every unspoken truth you carry like armor, with every silence that protects instead of pleads, with every step forward that says, I am enough, even if you don't see it, you become powerful in a way no explanation ever could make you. So now, as you stand at the edge of this new version of you, no longer a prisoner of approval, no longer a slave to validation, ask yourself, do you truly want to be understood? Or do you want to be free?